welcome to Property Quorum. Now, the keener-eyed amongst you will notice that we've had a slight shift around in personnel, and that the ladies are outnumbering the gentlemen. But that is totally appropriate, because what we're looking for today is clarity, and clarity is going to come from the professionals, which these ladies absolutely represent. First of all, welcome, as usual, to Juliet Babulal of Gunner Cook, Zara Olibuk of Nexa Law, and of course, Wendy Gibson of the First Time Buyers Club, and our Lord and Master, Hamish McClay of Search and Convey, which I'm going to mercilessly throw under the bus.
It has come to me that of late there is a particular seriousness about getting the right information, and the big story to me, strangely enough, is a question we might actually might get onto next week, which is the other side of what we want to speak about today. There is a tumult, it would appear, within conveyancing of the most unpredictable and unexpected queries arising from certain sides of the transaction between buying and selling. And at the same time, we're actually sort of working this. We know, both Zara and I were actually sort of at the conference last week where this new TA6 form was coming out relative to the way they were going to be handling sort of that. All the TA6s, to me, which is a simplistic way of looking at it, is information that people do genuinely need. But it is material, it's important information. It should be saving people answering questions. It seems to me that the more extended the TA6 form comes, or this form that anybody is actually producing, the more extended it becomes, the more questions arise rather than they're being reduced. So what we're trying to find out is, as the question says, what buyers and sellers need to know. And of course, when we say that, we speak about the people who are working on their behalf as well, because the likes of both Zara and Juliet particularly are taking the risk out. And of course, Wendy's looking out on behalf of the person who's going to be buying into that particular property as well. So it's clearly something which is important. What do we need to know? So if you like, the move is much more readily sort of transacted.
Juliet, welcome as ever. I have to ask, I thought, and I first want to make what I believe is a statement. I thought all this stuff had been ironed out. I thought it was obvious what everybody needed to know. They just get on with their various jobs, and then the transaction would flow smoothly. Am I wrong in that, or do buyers and sellers need more information that has not yet been made plain?
Well, I think, it just depends on the party involved. If it's a seasoned individual who's done multiple purchases, they're probably going to guide the professional, or they're going to know more than the professional because they've been through the mill and they know what to expect. And, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So when you've been bitten in the past, you learn from that and you then say, look, I don't want to have that anymore. I had a client who said to me, look, I was bitten by a particular restriction. I'm buying another property in the same block. I expect that restriction to come up. I want you to deal with it now. And so he had done his homework even before I had papers on my desk. And so that was him giving me that guidance. Equally, if you've got a first-time buyer, as Wendy, would be able to share with us, they're not going to be any the wiser. So you're the one who's then going to have to take, the driving seat and literally guide them and sort of improvise or try to understand where they're coming from. So I think there are three major things when you're looking at guidance. You've got to look at the costs involved. So if, for example, you know that your client's going to have to pay for searches, or they're going to have a huge land registry bill or stamp duty, whatever it is, managing expectations is quite important. You wouldn't believe how many deals where you get to completion and they realize they can't afford the stamp duty because they didn't even know how to calculate. So that's mismanagement, and that's wasting time. And that's the second point in terms of time management. If someone comes to you and says, look, I want to complete this in 2 weeks. Well, if you're a cash buyer, that is very, very possible. But if you're waiting for searches, again, as Hamish would be able to share, there's no guarantee you're going to get those searches back in 2 weeks. There's no guarantee you're going to get your mortgage offer within that time frame. So the reality is 2 weeks is not sustainable. So again, you look at the situation at hand and you guide your client in relation to timing. And it goes with the sellers as well, because you might have a seller that says, look, I'm going to pull out if they don't complete in a week. Well, hold on, Mr. Seller. Firstly, they're never going to be able to complete in a week. And secondly, if you put the property back on the market, you're unlikely to find a buyer within that time frame. So kind of, rein the seller in and manage their expectations in that way. And the final thing is, find out what your client wants to do with the property, because there will be restrictions, or there may be restrictions that they're not going to be able to do certain things. For example, if it's a developer who wants to build houses on there, but there's a restriction that the property can only be used as a single dwelling or whatever it is, then that's a problem, and that restriction needs to be dealt with. So there's a lot of homework that professionals need to do, but going to the right professional will always be beneficial, because they will look at it holistically. Yeah, it bangs on. I mean, it's the same thing. They look at the thing holistically, and even if you have to pay a lot up front, you'll eventually save yourself in time and costs later on, because you've gotten the right advice and the right steer.
Do you know what it's worth banging on about, Juliet? Wendy, is it a problem ongoing that buyers are just not furnishing their solicitors and their chain with enough information to get this done, or am I mistaking the whole thing?
It's both way rounds, actually. Quite often I find that buyers are frustrated because sellers are not forthcoming with information that they need to make an informed decision about a property that they are looking to purchase. Quite often, sellers themselves are unprepared. They haven't got their paperwork in place. They haven't even thought about all the necessary information that they may need to provide in the conveyancing process. And actually, the earlier they can show all of that stuff in the whole buying process, the quicker the conveyancing could likely be. So, buyers, obviously, first-time buyers, they've never been through the process before. Quite a number of them have no clue as to the steps that need to be taken and the order that they need to take them in. So they are reliant on the advice that they get from their solicitors, their surveyors, their brokers, particularly, to make sure that they facilitate and they get the information that they need to provide as early as possible. What they don't know is, as Juliet was alluding to, any restrictions that there might be on the title that might impact them later. And they are then reliant on their legal counsel to actually highlight those liabilities and make sure that they are acceptable for them, or if not, see if they can be removed. And if not, then perhaps they need to look for a different property.
Zara, am I getting the feeling that the sellers are the problem here? They're just not playing ball with their own legal counsel.
It's a mixture of things, Gareth, because sellers want to know that they've got a buyer before they go and find a property to buy. So they're juggling, trying to get in the door to go see a property, where some agents won't let them see a property unless they've actually sold theirs. And we've also got the issue of conditional selling, which many sellers and buyers aren't actually aware of. So sellers might not know that the estate agents are vetting potential buyers on the basis that they take one of their preferred services, whether it's a solicitor or mortgage broker, therefore limiting the offers that are coming through. And buyers, especially if you're a first-time buyer, you might not realise you're being bamboozled by the estate agent to use their recommended, because they're receiving a referral fee. No estate agent is going to declare that. And we all know that, buyers don't tend to read anything they're given. They just sign it and say, yes, get on with it. So they won't see the £400, £500 referral fee in the solicitor's letter. And if you think about this carefully, in whose best interest are these referral fees? The only person it benefits is the estate agent. People need to be the master of their own ship. And so they need to have somewhere like the First Time Buyers Club they can go to basically prepare themselves. And it's, if you're prepared beforehand, not only armed with advice on how to deal with your solicitor, how to deal with a broker, and how to deal with the estate agent, you're off to a good footing to make sure your transaction goes through a little bit quicker and more smoothly, and especially if you're not being railroaded into using a recommended solicitor. Now you think, oh, I might be buying a shared ownership property. Yes, don't worry, the solicitor knows how to handle that. But it's not the same depth as if you go for a specialist.
Right.
And, you know, people are just simply unaware of all the pitfalls, especially, you know, we've now been told as conveyancers, you know, you need to advise buyers of the difference between freehold and leasehold. Now, you would have thought that was the first thing that people would have learned, but you know, it still happens. I've asked people, do they know the difference? And they've turned around and said no. So you know, it's really, really important to, you know,
What these people you were asking, were they sellers? Are they solicitors?
No, they're first time buyers.
Right.
Buyers. Yeah, first time buyers. So
Right.
they think it's just a question of do the paperwork and hand me the keys. And it's not that simple. As Juliet said, you know, you've got to know what you can and cannot do with the property. And especially, you know, for leaseholds, a lot of people don't like you keeping pets in the building.
Well, quite right. Or as my wife says myself, she'd rather I was definitely outside with the pets. Anyway, moving on. Hamish, it seems to me that there's an information flow not happening.
Yes and no. We've actually sort of found, I mean, we know this about Juliet. A number of times I'm told, and don't blush or anything, Juliet, but the number of times that I'm actually sort of told about Juliet and the way how fastidious she is, you're in very, very safe hands with her. And it's very, very clear from the passion which Zara shows that from her particular perspective, she truly wants to take out that particular sort of risk. And I think the other aspect is the way Wendy tries to advise her first-time buyers. It makes me wonder almost, should we have a first-time sellers club? Because if the people who were selling properties understood a little bit more of what was going on, that would make a difference too. So it's a combination of information, and I think that we come back again, don't we? It's the professional attitude to the whole thing, and if providing we have the right professional approach, that particular buyer, that particular seller is going to be in the right position, because there are so many people who can guide. There are some first rate, and we've actually had them occasionally. We need to get a few of these back on again. The lenders, we need to listen to a few of those. We have some first-rate lenders who work very, very closely, then make sure that they're getting exactly what the buyer needs. And then we've got the legal side of it that sort of Juliet and sort of Zara sort of put together as well.
Well,
in terms of that. And of course, with Wendy trying to give advice, which is not saying you should go to this solicitor, you should go to that, you know, that lender, just to actually guide people to making their own decisions. We learn so much better if we're guided rather than told. Give people the option, let them take on board the fact that they themselves are they are the ones that are doing it for their particular sort of reason. And unless they tell us, unless we pull that out from them, we're never going to know what the reason is. So it is important. The information is always there. It's a matter of getting hold of it, I think.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But to quote to Chris, a friend of the show and works closely with Juliet, if there's a problem, Juliet will get it sorted. That's a direct quote. Juliet, now it seems to me, and this is also quoting Zara, you can bombard people with info, but it's like Zara speaking Spanish, or you chatting along in Italian. Unless we've got people who can understand the lingo, we're all doomed to failure. Is it the lack of understanding of the information that's provided? Is that what's holding everything up?
No, I think it's important that the professionals understand no one size fits all. So you've got people at different phases of the game. I mean, you know, we're talking about having a first-time sellers club. Well, you would have thought the seller went through the purchasing process and they would understand what they needed to get. So by extension, they'll understand what they need to provide to this incoming buyer. But it's not that clear cut. And I think that, you know, when Zara says, for example, we're now being told, explain what a freehold and leasehold means, it means not leaving any stone unturned. You know, I always have as my bugbear that solicitors' PI cover is always the fallback for everyone. So we're always looking at, you know, covering ourselves. But how far does one need to go? And for me, sometimes I even take it to the point where I say to clients, look, explain to me what you've understood by this so that I am clear that you've understood, you know, what the situation is. And in 2 years' time, you're not coming back and telling me, well, actually, I've got so much increased service charges, I'm going to sue you because I would never have bought the property if I knew the service charges were going to increase. And that, as silly as it sounds, it does happen. So you've got to look at subject matter, whoever you're advising, and take that information and present it in such a way that they then understand what you're conveying to them, which is why I say, you know, you've got some solicitors that have a standard report, and that standard report might suit certain people, but for a first-time buyer, you're going to have to break that down into bite-sized pieces so they actually understand what terminology means. And the other thing is, and this is for the audience, if you're speaking to a lawyer and they're using terminology that you don't understand, then perhaps that lawyer isn't for you, because you're not meant to be afraid to say to that lawyer, look, sorry, I don't know what a conveyance is. Can you tell me what that means? Or what is a restrictive covenant? You should leave that transaction being able to steer a second transaction after experiencing everything with the right professional. So the advice is, when you're choosing solicitors, it's not about your agent or your mortgage broker choosing someone that's on their referral panel. Vet that person, have a conversation with them, and get referrals from actual people that have used them. Go on to Google and Google them and see what people are saying about them. Because the last thing you want to do is spend a lot of money up front, and then halfway through the transaction, you realize, God, I've chosen the wrong advisor. Because most people would just stick with that advisor, and then they leave very disgruntled because they feel like they haven't gotten all of the information that they needed. And buying a house is one of the biggest investments ever. You don't want to be lumbered with something and you feel like, you know, you've got second thoughts or you've made mistakes, etc. So, you know, I say, after people, psychologists, lawyers are their next best trusted professional in their lives, and choosing the right lawyer is imperative.
I think someone who provides decent meditation so that you can chill out after all this has stressed you to buggery. All right. Hamish, as ever, would you have the last word?
Well, I think we pretty well sort of had it, that in the right way, the guidance is there. It's actually, the sad thing is, and I do feel, having been involved, as we well know, having 2 decades now, coming from it, if you like, having had limited experience, and it is very, very interesting that, of course, even though somebody may have bought a property in the past, even so somebody may have sold a property in the past, it's such a long-term thing now. It doesn't happen quite as frequently, and the law does change. But it's having that guide, that helping hand to see our way through it. And for heaven's sake, listen to the person, listen to the professional that's telling you. The one that's telling you, don't worry about that, that'll be okay, is not a person to be listening to. If somebody, as Zara so often sort of says, hey, look, have you looked at this particular side of it? Have you looked at the lease? Have you looked at the fees that you're going to have to pay for living there? You don't just want to get in there. You want to get in there and survive somewhere safe, somewhere we can afford to live. So the professionals are there. We've demonstrated. We've got three fantastic professionals here. None of whom are actually sort of in it for them to win it. They're in it for the buyer or the seller to win it. And that's all you need to do. Find the person that's going to help you win what you want.
The most frustrating thing I know for Zara, sorry to speak for you, is when she gives advice and people just bloody ignore it. And it's probably the same for any of us. The reason why I am so blessed to be part of Property Quorum is that we tend to be surrounded by people who know more than us, wouldn't you say, Hamish? And
absolutely.
And I'd say to any of you out there, if you're trying to do something as complicated and as mind-bending as a half-decent property deal where everybody wins, then I would recommend making sure that your supply chain of people, the people who provide the brilliance and the intelligence and the knowledge, are as key as anything else you could be doing. And that only leads me to thank Juliet Babulov of Gunnar Cook, Wendy Gibson, the first buyers club, of course, Zara Olibukas of Next Door, and Hamish McClay for having put together this. And for all of you out there, I guarantee, get the right people around you who really know their onions, and it will go through as smooth as glass. Get the wrong people, and you'll always be questioning whether or not you made the right decisions. So until next week, get your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and try and look after your mental health. Take care now. Bye-bye.